We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tune Into the Land. I am your host, Michael Delbar, CEO of the California Rangeland Trust. Our ranching partners are the heart and soul behind the work we do to protect California's open spaces. Over the past 26 years, 90 different ranching families have made the decision to voluntarily conserve their private ranches. And because of them, that means that 395,000 acres of precious working rangeland throughout the state will be free from development and conversion forever. With Earth Day fast approaching on April 22nd, this annual event serves as a special day to demonstrate support for our environmental protection. But for ranchers throughout the Golden State and beyond, every day is Earth Day. Through their meticulous care and stewardship of the land, our ranching partners are helping to sequester carbon, clean our air, supply us with fresh water, provide a nutritious food source, and maintain habitat for wildlife to thrive. These ranchers are helping to ensure a bountiful legacy for future generations. So with Earth Day coming up, we thought it would be fitting to sit down with one of the Rangeland Trust's esteemed ranching partners, Mr. Daniel Sinton. Alongside his wife and children, Daniel manages the family's ranching operations on their Canyon Ranch and their conserved Avenales Ranch. As a fifth-generation rancher running cattle along these magnificent landscapes in San Luis Obispo County, Daniel's generational knowledge, combined with his forward-thinking approach, allows him and his family to employ top-notch management practices that are helping to leave the land better than they found it for the next generation of land managers and California residents. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Daniel to the podcast.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Daniel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a fifth-generation cattle rancher in the San Luis Obispo County region of California. So we're halfway in between Los Angeles and San Francisco, near the coast. There's a coastal range of mountains that separate us from the coast. So we're a little hotter and colder climate than along the coast of California that's normally around here. My great-great-grandfather purchased our ranches here in San Luis Obispo County in 1875 and 1906. We have two ranches here covering about 18,000 acres. And we have a cattle ranch that we raise mama cows. So it's a cow-calf operation. And we also run some of our own steers until they're around about a year and a half to 2 years old, and we run those into a grass-fed beef program.
So there's two properties?
Correct, yeah. So we've got one's a 12,000-acre ranch that we call the Avenales Ranch, and another one called the Canyon Ranch, which is about 6,000 acres. My father, Steve, and my mother, Jane, live here on the ranch along with myself and my family. And we're on the Canyon Ranch side of things. The Avenales Ranch is 12,000 acres. It's surrounded by U.S. forest land, and we have a conservation easement through California Rangeland Trust on that piece of property.
So how did the Avenales Ranch come up with this name?
Well, so that was something that my great-great-grandfather put together, and Avenales means field of wild oats, and so we have a lot of large wild oats that flow through the valley. And it's funny because, you get so ingrained in running through the ranch on a, day-by-day basis that you kind of, you spot those types of things, but they don't have as much meaning because you see them every day. And I was this is several years ago with my grandfather in a helicopter that my uncle flies, and we came up and over the ridge, and we'd been flying over the forest and everything, and it's all brushy and real steep and rocky, and we pop over the top of this ridge. It's the middle of the summer, and it was like this huge golden oasis, and that is the picture in my mind that I always have when I think of the name Avenales. It's a field of wild oats, and that valley truly is just a an amazing kind of oasis within this forest land of brush.
Well, it's a beautiful ranch. Having the honor of been on it before, it's really a special place.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think we're truly lucky. I mean, there are a lot of beautiful places all over the California. That valley is truly unique, I believe, in the Pozo Valley. It's just so secluded, but yet so close to everything. I mean, as the crow flies, you're 15, 20 miles from San Luis Obispo and Bakersfield the other direction. And so it's just, I think it's this wonderful place to be that where you can go and it's truly the middle of nowhere.
I sure felt that way driving out there.
A lot of people do. I'll drive people in there in the dark and they're pretty sure I'm going to murder them in some way along the ways. Cause it really is, you go a long ways and then you hit the gate and then you go a long ways.
Long ways. Yeah. But it's sure worth it when you get out there. You
bet. Yeah.
There's also a very spectacular wildflower bloom in the spring.
Yeah. Yeah. We're currently in that phase, it's middle of March, which is just the beginning phase of wildflower season. This area, so that's on the Canyon Ranch side of things, which is kind of south of Shandon and east of Paso Robles. And, last year we probably had, my dad tried to give his best estimate on it based on how many cars he saw each weekend, but probably around 30,000 people drove through the ranch. And
wow.
Yeah, we have a county road that goes through the middle of the ranch, and so people meander through. But I think probably at least 75 or 80% of the people think that it's public land, and they're out tromping around, having picnics and creating pathways and stuff like that, which is okay. I mean, we don't openly allow it because we don't want the legal piece of things that come from that. But I think that a lot of us as ranchers believe it's our duty to provide open space to the public to at least view. Ours is a little more open than most, I think, but having that place for the public to come out and see and be a part of nature, I think is really important. And I don't think that a lot of the public understand that that's a huge piece of what rangeland and ranchers do.
And last year we had such amazing rains, and we have those again this year. And last year's bloom was really spectacular.
Yeah.
Is it shaping up to be equal to that this year?
It's off to a nice start. We could use a sprinkle of rain here at the tail end of March. Anytime you can get a bloom started and then have it rain on it, it really it elongates the season, but it also allows things to bloom contiguously. So you get if you don't have rains, they go in phases. So it'll be the Goldfield first, and then the poppies, and then it kind of rolls through, and then the lupin are at the very end. And in really good years, you have enough rain each kind of week or every 2 weeks to make the ones in the beginning last all the way through to the end. And so that's kind of what we had last year. But hopefully we'll get a little bit of that this year. We're already seeing people coming out to visit and be out in nature.
I hope they understand that those are working lands that they're witnessing, and the results of that management and the stewardship that you and your family do.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I've been trying to, I think all of us are trying, as ranchers, are trying to say that a little bit louder. I did an opinion piece or a perspective piece in Edible magazine recently here in San Luis Obispo, and I tried to explain that. I tried to say, hey, these are here because we've spent our lifetimes and generations protecting it and stewarding it, and we're hoping to continue to do it for the next 6 generations. So
then on the Canyon Ranch, you also have some vineyard.
Yeah, so we planted 120 acres of vineyard. Well, we planted 100 acres of vineyard in 1972, and then 20 more in the late 1990s. Yeah, I think my grandfather did that in 1972, and that was really early for this area. Now Paso Robles is a wine region, right? It's really known for that, and we have a lot of tourism for that. But in 1972, nobody had vineyards here, and I think my grandfather saw that through the guidance of my parents and my uncle Tom, who went to enology school at Davis, saw that this could be a region where you could plant grapes successfully and have really good quality But he also saw it as a way to diversify on the ranch. We have 18,000 acres of open range land, and he put less than 1% of that into vineyards. And that less than 1% helps to keep the financials going for the entirety of the ranch. Maybe a lot of people listening to this podcast know that ranching isn't where you're making a bunch of money, but for those who don't, ranching is not something that you're out there making a lot of money for, and that's not what we're doing it for. Obviously, everybody's just doing it for the love of the land and the love of being outside and working on your own land, right?
So when did you start making your own wine?
That was 2007 was our first pick for our vintage. So we have Petit Syrah, Chenin Blanc, Cabernet, and a thing called Val d'Aiguille, which is fairly unknown up until the last couple of years, where a lot of people are successfully doing some really neat things with that kind of wine.
So of course, the grapes and the wine help subsidize the beef side of things, but you're also doing your own beef marketing.
Yeah, that's been an interesting new piece. I don't know that we ever thought that that's what we would be doing, but it's been a nice new avenue to try to bring in a little extra money, but also have people be more connected to ranchers and the land that we're protecting, right? So I started the beef side of things about, it's probably been 5 or 6 years now, and it's just direct to consumer. There's a few restaurants here, actually one restaurant here in San Luis Obispo County called The Range in Santa Margarita that carries our beef, and it's been a really interesting journey. And you talk to people who some people get the beef and they understand it. They know why it tastes different. They know how to cook it differently because it's all grass fed and grass finished. But then there's a lot of people who you really have to educate why it tastes different. I mean, it's not only grass fed, but we're dry aging it for 27 days. And so there's a lot of flavor in that thing. And that's so different than commodity beef. Commodity beef is so watered down in flavor that I think that people don't totally understand that what beef can really taste like. And so, it's trying to get back to the old days of what our grandparents might have had. And I think that people are really resonating with that. And it's nice to see a market coming back so that to us where we can do something direct to them and not have to get back into the commodity system. That's a really tough thing, but you can see it coming back. And one of the big pieces is butchers locally, having a place to harvest your animals and cut and wrap them and play the game of the USDA. That's been a difficult piece, but I can see all of those pieces coming back again.
Well, the dry aging's not very common, and especially in the direct consumer marketing. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to do that, and explain to the listeners a little bit of what that entails?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so all of this really started from my grandfather. He lived to be 101, and in his, I call it mid 90s, my parents were out searching for beef because he was kind of complaining about everything being tough and having no flavor and all these things. And so my poor parents were just hunting everywhere for the best beef they could find. And they'd bring it in and it'd be the most tender they could find and all this stuff. And he was never all that pleased with it. And so I was sitting with him at dinner one night and I said, "Hey, what did you used to have? I mean, why do you think it's so different, or why do you think it's lacking?" And he said, "Well, everybody used to dry age their beef. The old cowboys, they'd go in and they'd get a steak from the store or somewhere and they'd wrap it in cellophane and they'd throw it in the refrigerator and forget about it for a couple weeks. And then they'd come in and they'd scrape the mold off or whatever was on there and they'd cook it up." And I thought, all right, well, and then he explained a couple other things along the way. And so I didn't tell him I was going to do it, but I went and grabbed a steer, took it in, dry aged it for 27 days because that's what he had suggested. And then I brought him a fillet and we were having dinner. I didn't tell him I was bringing him. I didn't tell him about the process or anything. And I cooked up the steaks and I put one on his plate and we started to eat, and he took his first bite and his eyes like lit up and he goes, this is what I used to have. This is the flavor I've been missing. And I thought, and when I had it, I was like, oh God, this is wildly different. And it's got, wine has different elements to it, and everybody talks about all these different flavors that you pull from it, and cheese has the same thing, and olive oils and all these things, but truly beef has that as well. And so that dry aging process tenderizes things, I think, quite a bit, especially for grass-fed beef. He said that was absolutely critical in the process. And so that's how it started. And then I had harvested this one animal. And so I called all my friends and said, hey, I got a bunch of beef. Anybody want some? And so they did. And then they were kind of blown away. So they started telling friends, and that was rolling along like that for a while until I had this guy call me out of nowhere, and he was from Los Angeles, and he said, hey, I want some beef. And I said, well, how did you find me? And he said, well, it wasn't easy. And he said, then he came up and he got his animal and all that stuff, and he was happy. And then I started marketing it a little bit, and it's grown a lot. And now we're at a point where we're doing several animals a month, and it's growing into something that I could see being a bigger part of the operation. But it just takes a lot of different pieces, right? It takes having the animals and having the space and the grass and all the things to be able to finish them. And then the butcher's a huge piece of it. And so, yeah, it's coming together, and I'm excited about the future, but we'll just have to see where it goes.
Where do folks find your beef?
Well, our website is avenalesranch.com, and you can come on there, and basically we have a little wait list on there. So you just plop in your name and information, and then we kind of set you up for when the next group will be available. So we're sold out through early May at this point. But actually, I mean, it's a good problem to have, but the current problem is we don't have enough animals to supply the demand. And so that's one thing we're working on trying to figure out going forward. So,
well, that's a good problem.
For sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure those steaks pair real well with an Avenales red.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. Yeah. We're going to do a picnic. We do an annual picnic here in the Wildflowers, which is coming up in end of April 21st. We have a deal where all our wine club members come out, where this is actually the first year where I was prepared enough that I got enough tri-tips and enough ground beef and other cuts to be able to have our barbecue be Avenales Ranch beef, which is kind of funny. I think a lot of people are like, well, why weren't you using your beef before? And I was like, it takes a lot of animals to get 2 tri-tips. You get 2 tri-tips per one animal. I got to harvest a lot of animals if I'm going to supply a whole barbecue full of tri-tips. So, yeah, I'm prepped this year. I'm excited. We'll be pairing it up with some wine, and that's been really successful every year, and people really enjoy it. It's a good way for people to connect with the land.
Oh, nice. Well, the Avenales, we talked about how remote it is, and it's adjacent to the Los Padres National Forest. Mm-hmm. And so between the ranch and the forest, that's about 1.8 million acres of both public and privately conserved rangeland. That land is critical habitat for quite a large number of plant and wildlife species. And the stewardship that your family does on that land plays a significant role in helping create a vibrant environment for those species. Can you talk to us a little bit about your management and stewardship activities on the Avenales?
Sure. When the family talks about what we do on a daily basis, obviously we're a cattle ranch, and we're trying to preserve the land, not just for us, but for future generations as well as the public, right? Open air, open space, clean air, clean water, everything that's flowing from there. The Salinas River starts on the ranch. So I can pinpoint the exact place on the ranch where the Salinas River starts. There's a place that we call the Divide, and on one side of that flows out to Santa Maria and out the Santa Maria River, and the other side flows through and starts the Salinas River. So, that those types of things are so critical, right? And so when we talk about what we're doing on a daily basis, we're working cattle and managing the land, but an awful lot of that is for the water and the species that are calling that home, right? I mean, there's no better place than rangeland for animals and plants to survive, right? We've shown that time and time again. Californian Rangeland Trust has done a wonderful job of pointing that out. And we do a lot of different things that provide habitat for those animals. Obviously, water is probably the most critical piece of it. So during the summer when the river isn't flowing, we have water troughs all over the ranch. And we also have little water troughs next to it that are wildlife water troughs. So, little birds and quail and squirrels and all the little things can get in there and get some water during the hottest parts of the year where really you can't find water other places. And bears and deer and pigs and bobcats and all of these turkeys, all these other animals are floating around the ranch and they're finding water via our water troughs. But on top of that, the cattle grazing provides a huge piece of that circuit, right? Grazing down the land to the right level allows for a certain amount of cover for birds and then also enough that you have good growth and soil microbes and all of those pieces. Everything is intertwined out there, and it's wonderful to see it every day, right? And manage it for the cattle to be a part of it, but they are just a part of it.
It's quite an array of species.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that's probably half of them, right? And you could go down a list of 100 different birds probably that call the ranch home, and those are almost background noise when you're running around out there. But if you focus in on just the bird species, it's pretty tremendous. We have Audubon Society created the Audubon Ranching Program, and which we're a part of, and that has really opened my eyes to all of the little things that you don't normally see. And they did a great job of putting together a huge list of all the bird habitat that we have and how many birds are out there. It was kind of cool. They came out and they were doing their little study and tracking everything. And the gal was camping at our corrals, and she woke up in the morning and she saw these birds flying around that aren't supposed to be there. Maybe they float through the area every once in a while, but she didn't think they were supposed to be there. It's called a purple martin, and turns out they were actually nesting on the ranch, which they had never recorded. So they had this huge new piece of things that they didn't know existed, and thanks to the land and them being on there and having the access to it, they were able to see that and put in a whole new piece to the puzzle that they didn't know about. So
that's pretty cool. Last month podcast, we had Matt Allhouse, who is California Senior Director of Conservation Ranching Program for Audubon. So we learned a little bit more about what that process is, what that program does. And that's pretty special to have all those species on the Avenales. And now that you're part of that ranching program, conservation ranching program with Audubon, that gives you another label to use on your beef.
Sure.
What's the significance of that label? How important is it to have that to showcase the work that you're doing, the habitat and the tie to the bird species on the Avenales?
Well, I think there's the immediate group of people who are a part of the Audubon that understand, birds, right? But beyond that, I think that those types of things allow consumers to have one more piece that they didn't know was important, right? I think if somebody comes along who has no idea what the Audubon Society is, has no idea that a purple martin is floating through the ranch, can understand that the ranch is more than just open space and habitat, right? It involves a lot of different species that they wouldn't normally know about. And I think consumers are starting to pay a lot more attention to that kind of thing, and it's becoming more important to them that those are the pieces that are involved, right? I mean, on the wine side of things, it's sustainable or that you're not using pesticides and herbicides and growing things organically or even regeneratively, which we're doing. We put cattle in the vineyard to mow the cover crop that we put on, so we don't end up having to use fertilizer, things like that. So, that's the same thing in ranching and beef. I think people are starting to see those pieces as really important, and Audubon is a new piece, but one that I think is probably going to gain some pretty significant traction as people understand what that actually means.
Why did you pursue certification through the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program?
Well, they actually pursued us, which was great. I've I wasn't aware that they had the program. And then when they approached us, because we're organically certified for all 18,000 acres, we're also GAP 4, which is a humanely certified program. I think that put us on their radar, and then they started to build out a program here in California for folks who are interested in showcasing those types of things. And so I really didn't know what they had in mind, but I'm always open to those types of things. And so they came out, and Matt Allshouse, who you had on previously, he was funny. He came out and he said, well, can I camp on the ranch while I'm there? And I said, sure, of course. So he came out, and he came back from camping in the morning, and he said, God, I got woken up by the meadowlarks. They were so loud, and there were so many of them. He said, I've camped all over the country. And he said, I've never seen this high a density of meadowlarks before. And so we talked about that piece of things, right? And when he started talking about that, talking about the program and what it involved, it was a no-brainer. Much like a lot of these things, it's a no-brainer to be a part of the GAP program, because we're already running things humanely, right? It's just the certification to go through and point out to the consumer that that's how we're doing it.
So you have a GAP label, you have an Audubon label, both those on your packaged meat. How significant do you feel that is for the consumer to notice? And is that what you're feeling in terms of the return on that? You're doing that work anyway. You're providing that habitat. You're doing the welfare practices on the animals, sharing that information with the consumer. Do you think that labeling is pretty important?
Oh, 100%. Those three things, the organically raised, GAP 4, humanely raised, and Audubon, those three things, and regenerative is probably the next big piece that's much more stringent, but we'd like to get there, is, these are things we're already doing, like you said, but to show to consumers those pieces of it, I think that's really important to them. I mean, I think a lot of consumers are living in cities, right? They don't know what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and it's even really hard for them to fathom what we're doing. And here you and I are out running around, and those are things we do every day. So it's almost like a back of the mind kind of a thing, because that's just what we do. But to somebody who's not fully engulfed in that every day, it isn't. And so these certifications have great proof for those people, but I think they're searching those things out. And I've seen that based on the questions that are coming through. I mean, people really feel it's important to disconnect from the larger commodity system if they can. Not everybody can, but if they can, eat healthy or be more connected to the rancher that's providing the food, understand where their food's coming from. I mean, that's a hugely important thing for everyone, and I think that's growing.
What's another way of telling our story in a maybe even more subtle way, but drawing attention to that activity that, as you said, we're doing every day, and to us, to those ranchers, it's second nature.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, is getting that story out there, telling that story. Older generations may be less willing to do that. They just came from a different time.
Yep.
But what we're starting to see is, as the younger generations are moving into and taking over the ranching businesses, and pair that with the explosion of social media, just sharing what's going on every day is kind of fun to do, but it's also educating those folks that are so far removed from farming and ranching, and all they know is that they go to the store and they buy something, and it's food, and not having any real understanding of what it took to produce that food. And so by sharing just a little bit on whether it's animal welfare, whether it's regenerative ag, or whether it's a Audubon conservation ranching program, that label on that package gives that consumer, at least I think so, some additional peace of mind knowing that, hey, this is a great product, and look at all that goes into producing it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's a different time. I mean, it may not have, the older generation didn't have to do it this way. They didn't have a microphone or a soapbox to get on, and they probably wouldn't have gotten on it if it were there. But I think that it's one of those things that now, with social media being so prevalent and the voice of the other side saying things so loudly, that this industry needs to counteract that with the truth. And while it's not something that we're necessarily good at or that we want to spend our day on, it's really important that we do.
Absolutely. Well, your family has a deep history with the Rangeland Trust, starting with your father, who was our founding board chair and worked hard with other ranchers in the California Cattlemen's Association to start the Rangeland Trust. And your father, Steve, served for quite a long time, finally stepping down.
As long as he could.
As long as he could, and is still very active as a emeritus council member.
Yes.
And which is great, because I know I rely on him constantly for direction, and he's kind of our compass that we call on. Are we heading the right way? And then you followed in his footsteps. You served on the Rangeland Trust board. Share with us why you are so passionate, and your family is so passionate about this rangeland conservation work, and why you think there's a calling there.
Well, where do you begin? I mean, there's so many pieces that are important to this, right? And I think I'll start with my grandfather, and that, he led his whole life in a way where he wanted to preserve the land for the next generation. And that was so critical to him. And he was worried that at some point somebody was going to get so far disconnected, a cousin, a descendant that traveled further enough away from things that they hadn't been on the ranch or hadn't been on it for a while, would become disconnected enough that they would want to sell, and it would all fall to pieces. And you see that all the time. I mean, you probably see it more than anybody else in the state, but we have friends around us, neighbors, and families are all starting to push to sell the land because it's worth something, right? And California Rangeland Trust is such a critical piece in helping ranchers stay on their land and stay ranching and keep that as open space forever. I think that's why it was really important to my father to start things, but my grandfather, for our personal ranch, that was, to keep it there for future generations. But going statewide, the foresight for my dad and everybody else on that original board to get in there and actually do all of this is pretty amazing. I mean, you look at things now and the hundreds of thousands of acres that Rangeland Trust has preserved.
395,000, not that we're counting.
Almost across that border there at 400, right? So I think that, that's such a critical piece in California, is that families are getting to a point where either they need the money or want the money, and there aren't people coming back to the ranch, that things are continually being sold and being developed into something, intensified ag or houses or whatever it is. And I'm really afraid that we're going to lose our open space in California, which is so critical to, as you can see from the wildflower visitors, so critical to the public, but also to like we talked about, the plants and animals.
I remember when we closed the deal, when we conserved the Avenales in 2017, and your grandfather, Jim, was 101 years old. Mm-hmm. And we had an easement celebration out there on the ranch. And to see that joy, and you can almost see the peace in knowing that ranch is permanently protected. And we saw, I think it was 4 generations of Sintons there together. Mm-hmm. That's a huge accomplishment. And, kudos to the entire Sinton family for wanting to do that. From your perspective, what did that mean to the whole family to permanently protect the Avenales Ranch?
Well, yeah, peace, right? Peace for my grandfather, who had worked his whole life to get to that moment, and kudos to the Rangeland Trust and my dad for figuring out how to make that happen. And peace for the rest of us. I'm currently the one managing the property, and knowing that it can't be sold and it can't be developed and it'll be like that forever takes a huge part of what we're trying to do on a daily basis out of the picture of worry, right? So I'm not worried about somebody wanting to develop or sell their piece of it. And so, gosh, I wish everybody were lucky enough to be able to have that kind of peace of mind, right? And the Rangeland Trust has done that for a lot of different families so far.
And you have children of your own?
Yeah, I've got two boys. They're 12 and 10 at the moment. And, they were out yesterday barefoot running in the creek with the new puppy. And yeah, it's good. It's good to see the sixth generation running around on the land.
That's pretty special.
Yeah.
And it's there for the benefit of all Californians, even though, it may be in Sinton family, but all those benefits that you mentioned earlier, the clean air, the clean water, the open space, that open space is there for folks to see. But it's not just open space. That's a working landscape. And if we lose that working landscape, we lose everything that goes with it, all those ecosystem services. So it means a lot to the Rangeland Trust to have the Sinton family and the Avenales as our ranching partners. It's the support and dedication and passion that you all show for rangeland conservation across the state. Not to mention there in San Luis Obispo County is incredible. And a huge thank you for all you do, all your family does.
Oh gosh, well, thank you. I mean, the feeling is mutual. I think obviously we're a huge part of Rangeland Trust and have been for a long time, but I think that the mission that you guys put together, man, if we could only get a couple $1 billion worth of money to be able to save all the rangeland in California, wouldn't that be nice?
That would be amazing. Well, Daniel, it's been an honor to have you on the podcast this month. Good luck with all of the wildflower bloom, and continue to showcase that to the public, and so they can see the results of the hard work that you all do on the land. And good luck with this year's harvest on both the wine side and, of course, on the beef side.
Thanks, Michael.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Tune Into the Land. Remember, next Monday is Earth Day. As we celebrate the place we all call home, be sure to tip your hats to the men and women that are ensuring the protection of our environment through their stewardship of their private working lands. After all, every day is Earth Day for California's cattle ranchers. This closes the gate on another episode of Tune Into the Land. Be sure to hit that follow button so you can be notified when the next episode is released. Thanks for listening.